Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my NACL week number 4 overview and analysis video. Of course, coming out once again on Wednesday. I'm trying my best to get these videos out before the start of games on Wednesday. It's just a little bit more difficult as of late. I hope you guys can forgive me, but a lot of fun action to talk about here in week number 4. A lot going down. We're almost halfway through. I think we are actually over halfway through with the NACL regular season. Pretty crazy that we are already there, but we are definitely figuring a lot out about these teams in this single round robin. So if you're excited, let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of week number 4, whether you think teams are going up, whether you think teams are going down, and whether or not these teams are living up to your own expectations. Of course, I will be giving my thoughts as we go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series to each series that we cover, and of course, at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 10 at the end of the video as well, but most of today, as per usual, will be spent talking about the 6 best of 3s we got here in week number 4. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and kick things off with day number 1, and I was really excited to see this first matchup because combined right now, these two teams have 2 game losses amongst themselves. It was Conviction taking on Dragonsteel DarkZero, and DarkZero is going to pick up a victory here, a 2-0 win. They're going to move to 8-0 on the split, and we said it last week. I will continue to say it this week. This team is in prime position right now to go undefeated in the entirety of the spring split. They might not drop even a single game with the trajectory that they're on at the current moment. I know that there are a lot of allegations of like, oh, well, they get to play closer to the server, they get less ping, whatever, man. These guys are ridiculous. It's actually just unfair to watch them play, but I do want to give a ton of credit over to Conviction because I don't think we've seen a team actually push DarkZero in the way that Conviction was able to across this week, or across this series. It really was a great look from them, and this is a team that has looked great out the gate as well. I know obviously a lot of that came in week number 1, and so it feels like forever ago in a lot of League fans' minds, but this has been a very good League of Legends team, and certainly one of, in my opinion, the 4 best in the NACL. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Sajed in the bot lane. I think this is pretty much open for interpretation, as it usually is with a DarkZero win. Broadcast ended up giving it to Yuji, and while I certainly understand why they would give it to Yuji in terms of consistency, I thought his game 1 was excellent on Sejuani. His game 2 on the Xin Zhao, still very good, but not quite as dominant in my opinion, even if the KDA would kind of disagree in that regard. The reason I didn't really consider Yuji is it's really hard for me to give player of the series to somebody who I don't think got a player of the game in the series. Like, maybe he was more consistent than both Spyrex and Sajed throughout this series, but Spyrex was definitely the guy in game number 1 on the Yone, and Sajed was definitely the guy in game number 2 on the Varus, and to me that kind of cancels out Yuji's contributions. Not to say that Yuji wasn't incredibly impactful here, just that I think Sajed deserves player of the series for that Varus game in game number 2. He really was the one they were attempting to funnel and to facilitate, and it really worked out for them. Chrome put up a great fight on the other side. Even Manui, I thought, played really well across both of the games in this series. There was a lot of attention shown in that bot lane, but Sajed's been excellent for this team. I know he's not necessarily been what Scary Jerry was, but he's been pretty darn close, and obviously this team is even more dominant than Maryville, Dragonsteel was last year, and that's just a really good sign. Him and Zyko, I think, are slowly starting to develop some more consistent chemistry. Zyko has not been that breakout, carry support that he kind of was for a lot of last year, where I think he was pretty clearly the best support in the NACL, maybe outside of Chime. I expected him to really take that mantle overall in 2025. That hasn't necessarily happened in terms of the individual games, but of course this bot lane in general is really crushing the 2v2, and that's what you would expect. Spyrex is the other player that you really want to point out in a positive way for DarkZero, because that game 1 on the Yone was terrific. If he wasn't not so good in game 2 on the Akali, I think things might have gone a bit differently, but he was not particularly good in game 2 on the Akali, so I can't necessarily factor that in too heavily, but he was excellent in game 1. Yuji did get it on broadcast for a reason. I want to reiterate that. I'm not trying to debate or dispute how big and important Yuji was for the team here. He went deathless as the jungler, playing Sejuani and Xin Zhao across these 2 games. That should go to show you just how important and how well he was playing, but I don't think he necessarily was the one driving them forward in every instance. You could definitely make that argument for game number 1, but I think Spyrex's Yone was really the thing that created a lot of that pressure. The Xin Zhao was definitely more so playing off of the pressure that the Varus and the Alistar had. Zamudo was good in the top side, maybe not great. I think that there were some problems on the Gwen in game number 1, but DarkZero is just unstoppable. This team feels like they cannot be conquered really in any way. They have 2 full rosters that I think both could compete for top 3 in the NACL at the current moment, and that just is completely unfair there for now. Their number one roster feels actually untouchable, and I think they showcase that once again here. And then for Conviction on the other side, this is a genuinely good team. There was so much to like about how this team played, especially the second game in game number 2, where they made it incredibly close. They just didn't have the firepower to be able to get over the best team in the league. They would have beaten almost any other team in the NACL with this performance. I actually think every other team probably loses to them if they play the way they did in game 2, and it's just unfortunate that they had to run into DarkZero, who again just seems to be unbeatable at the current moment. Darkwings is unfortunately going to get my dud of the series. This is mostly for that game 1 on the Talia, but I do think he needed to do a bit more on the Jace. This game just goes really long, and he's not able to stay nearly as useful as the rest of his team. Again, I think you could make the argument that this should go to Hoarder or that this should go to Manui, but I really would push back on those. First of all, it's just hard for me to criticize Hoarder when really he was just playing Ambessa and Cassante. He was doing everything he was supposed to do. Zamuda was really good in this series, but that's not a takeaway from Hoarder. And then Manui definitely was doing a lot for this team. Chrome was a primary carry. Aaron was a primary carry. And I thought Kisno was terrific for this team, especially on the Zyra in game number 2. It just didn't end up working out for them. Once again, I want to reiterate, I think they beat most teams in the NACL with this performance, just not DarkZero. And that's really the unfortunate kind of turn of events here. They moved to 2-2, they moved to 4-4. I don't think that record is indicative of how good they've been. They've been terrific across the start of this split. To me, very clearly the number 4 team, below that top 3, but above everybody else right now in the NACL. And DarkZero is above everybody. This team is the team to beat. I think it would take a pretty monumental effort to be knocked out of number 1 in my power rankings by DarkZero, and they did not give me any reason to change my mind in that regard here. So credit to them, they started off this week incredibly hot. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and it's another good matchup here between Blue Otter and CCG Esports, and CCG is going to pick up the 2-0 win, although I think 2-0 doesn't necessarily indicate just how close this series was, how dominant, or how fun game number 1 was. Dominant's maybe not the word. It was dominant in both directions. Both teams really putting in a lot of work. Blue Otter very much pushing CCG in this series, but it is a 2-0 at the end of the day, and this really confirms kind of what we've been talking about, where it feels like Conviction and CCG are really fighting it out for number 4. You know, we kind of just talked about Conviction looking really good in their loss to DarkZero and kind of how they've really earned that number 4 spot. CCG is certainly making it as interesting as possible, and it's not the last time we're going to talk about them as we continue to go on throughout this week. But for now, player of the series for me is going to go to Array in the bot lane. I think this one was really tough for me to give out because everybody on CCG kind of held up their own end of the bargain, if you will. There have been some concerns with this team for me so far this split in terms of their losses to top-end teams. Remember, they were 1-2 coming into this series, but both of those losses were to the best teams in the league, right? They had only played top 3 teams outside of their victory earlier on this split over, I want to say, Supernova in week number 1. Yes, it indeed was Supernova, and CCG looked very good in that series, and they continue to look good against the teams they're supposed to beat, but it really is kind of an all-around effort, which is kind of what we wanted to see. Again, the way I described this roster in my primer when I was talking about them at the beginning of the split was they're really solid across the board. They don't necessarily have a single player that you would, point out and be like, you're going to win MVP. You're going to be somebody that can really carry this team across the finish line. Like, I thought Levitate could be that for Blue Otter. That's not necessarily been the case. Hell, I think even like Samikin or Rovex, could have been that for Blue Otter. That's not necessarily been the case for them. Even someone like Conviction has Chrome, who I think really could elevate them in that way. I don't think you were ever looking at a player on CCG to be that. It's just they don't really have a weak link, or at least we thought they didn't have a weak link. Aojun has definitely been more up and down, I would say, in the NACL when they're playing really good talent. You can see his inexperience kind of get taken advantage of at certain times, but in a series like this, where he's going into Samikin and he's just asked to do Rise things in the back half of game 2, or, play Victor in team fights, it actually looks really good from him, so that's a great sign. But Array and Breezy are the standouts right now. They're just winning lane. They're just winning 2v2 every single game. It's super impressive to watch them be able to generate leads, and I get that he's playing like Kalista into Kaisa, and he's playing Varus into Jim. Like, these aren't the hardest lane matchups in the entire world, but it's not isolated to this series. Even when you're looking at the series they had against good teams, Array and Breezy have been so good in the 2v2, and it's so funny because I think both of these players are basically in the exact same spot. They've both been very good at this level for quite a long time, but are kind of overlooked because they're not like the flashiest players. They've just consistently been like the 3rd or 4th best players in their role in tier 2 for like 5 years in a row at this point. Array is obviously great. I've hyped him up before. I think he has the potential to break out, but I think if he was going to do it, it probably would have happened on that Golden Guardians team a couple of years ago. Breezy is incredibly solid, especially on playmakers. He has a really good eye for when to engage and when to facilitate. I just think he can sometimes get a little bit lackadaisical in lane. That being said, that's not been the case so far this split. Everything's kind of looked good from them, so I'm really excited to see if they can continue to improve. I thought Crimson was awesome in this series, especially in game number 1 on the Mbessa. Really been impressed with him in terms of his raw mechanics. He's the kind of player that I think could get on a better team, no offense to CCG, but could get on like a top tier team and just figure it out in the way that Zamudo was able to do that when he was brought up to Maryville. I think that that is kind of a trajectory that I could see possible for Crimson with his mechanical talent. Dardoch is totally fine in the jungle. He's going to go undervalued for how good he was in the back half of these games, and like I said, Aljin was solid as well. So CCG just looking good across the board, and for Blue Water, it's just not that great of a look to see that this team is pretty clearly worse than the top 5, and you kind of wanted to see them in the mix there, and they're just not at the current moment, and it's everybody on the team. You cannot point to one player and say, well, you've been good, but the rest of the team has let you down, even if you can look at some of the points in this series in particular and be like, it wasn't your fault. I don't think this series is Samikin's fault in the mid lane, although I do think it's a very interesting pick at the end of the day. The MF mid lane didn't fail. Like, it was useful in terms of what it was trying to do. Levitate and Rovex have good KDAs, but they were down in gold basically the entirety of this series, and that's just not something that I'm super in on. Music got out-jungled by Dardoch. I don't even think that's all that up for debate. He was much more active on the Xin Zhao in game 1, but even on the Lilia in game 2, he was looking and not always finding everything. And Quacker, I mean, he's getting dead of the series, if almost entirely for that Gwen game in game number 1. Gwen is very strong and very dominant right now, but you cannot go 4-13 on Gwen. Like, that is just completely unacceptable. If that's going to be the way that you're going to play the champion, that's dud of the series. Like, there's no other way to describe how that ends up going. So Quacker ends up getting that, but Blue Water in general, like as a unit, just aren't playing up to their own standard right now. Levitate has not taken that next step. In fact, the way I want to kind of point out, not only Blue Water, but like individual players as well, is it really feels like the early part of summer last year, where they were kind of on a losing streak. They were, fighting it out to not be in the bottom 2 before they went on this gigantic hot streak going into playoffs and really kind of solidified themselves as a top 4, top 5 team in the NACL last year. The version of them right now feels so much more similar to that early season version where they're okay in lane, like they're totally fine at being able to stay alive, but their late game team fighting is disastrous. They don't really have good macro. They're not really sure how to play the map, and good teams are just kind of able to pull them apart, and that continues to be a big issue for them. So I hope to see that fixed, because there were so many expectations for this roster running it back a year again in 2025, but it's just not worked out so far, and for CCG, the expectations now for me have gone through the roof. This absolutely should be a team that's fighting it out for top 4, top 5. I think the top 5 teams right now in the NACL are just better than everybody else in terms of the bottom grouping of teams, and unfortunately Blue Otter's not there, but CCG have cemented themselves in that upper echelon, and I'm really excited to be able to say that. Then moving on now to day number 2, our middle day here in week number 4, and we definitely kicked it off with a series between Luminosity Gaming and Polestar that Luminosity pretty predictably is going to be able to take and also be able to dominate. Unfortunately for Pulse, I think the 2 wins that they've gotten so far this year are kind of going to be the highlight. The 0 series win seems like it's going to continue. This is the worst team in the NACL, and Luminosity is not the kind of team you can make these kinds of mistakes against. I think that there are some takeaways from Pulse that aren't the worst thing in the world. A couple of players here have impressed me marginally in terms of what they've been able to do, but it's just unfortunate. This team is not ready for this level. None of these players are ready for this level individually because they're just getting embarrassed in the 1v1s, and Luminosity is one of the best teams in the league, and so of course it ended up going like this. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series, I think there are 2 phenomenal options, 3 if you really want to get spicy. Tactical is going to get it for me because it's just so difficult to not give player of the series to a guy who got 17 kills in a game on Corki. That is definitely one of the players that is going to stand out to you the most, but he played those fights really beautifully. I think he's starting to draw himself back in. Again, this is the guy who was getting caught out mid-wave all the time in 2024 and 2023 when he was on Immortals, even going back, especially to the TSM days. That was something that was like a real actual issue for him. I think he's really starting to get a bit more like respectful in that regard, even against poorer teams. Now, that being said, like a lot of this is because we've heard him speak on the issue, and he said, my role here, I understand, is not to be the #1 guy. We've got players who can win everywhere on the map. If they need to take priority, then they can do that, whereas I know he felt on Immortals like he kind of had to be that guy. It's definitely a difference in mentality, but the results are there. I think he's been exceptionally good, especially over the past 2 weeks, and I think if he keeps this form up, I'm going to feel really good about putting him as my number 180 carry heading into the year. I already feel good about putting him as the number 180 carry. He's been exceptionally good. Zeyzal, of course, also deserves an honorable mention, a shout in terms of player of the series. Not only did he mega gap both Hub and Tubbs on the other side of this, but going deathless on Rakan and Alistair in this series is not easy. He was incredible. He was involved in everything that Luminosity did, and you definitely want to give him a shout out. And then Fake God in the top lane is really the other one that I think deserves some sort of mention. The Silas in game 2 was absolutely gorgeous from him. He massacred Dr. Calculus in lane, and honestly, as he said in the interview, he got a ton of kills stolen throughout this one, so credit to Fake God. I thought he was really good. Insanity pulls out Zed mid in game 2. I'd be more hyped about this if we hadn't seen it quite a few times already in the other regions, but it's nice to see it here in North America. Tomio continued to be excellent. There was no weak link for Luminosity. They were great across the board, and for Pulse on the other side, they're just not good enough to play at this level. It's becoming more and more clear they're certainly not good enough to compete with teams that are not closer to the bottom of the standings, right? We saw them be able to at least push some of the collegiate teams or, Apex Mission Impossible. That's not going to be the case when going up against Luminosity. It's a completely different ballgame, and they continue to struggle in that regard. I don't know who to give dud of the series to. It should go to one of Dr. Calculus or Adam. Like, one of the solo laners almost assuredly is kind of at fault here in terms of where this game ended up going. I ended up giving it to Adam because, once again, just picking Talia and giving over a ton of pressure, picking Azir and not really landing a consequential ultimate or really doing a ton of damage throughout a lot of this game. It's just not a great look. Adam definitely doesn't feel like a player who's comfortable at this level just yet. And again, I'm not blaming any of these guys. These guys, took a last-minute spot on Pulse to get the chance to participate in Tier 2. I'm certainly not criticizing, them, but it's clear that they're not ready. Dr. Calculus got obliterated on the top side by Fake God. I very much wanted to give him dud of the series because he was not very good at all in this one, but it just kind of is what it is. Like, Tubbs and Hub never had any pressure. Even the scoreline of Hub is probably a bit generous. I think Bio was the only player even attempting to look to make plays for Pulse, and even at the end of the day, it's not like he was even close to competing with Tomio in terms of resources, even after the 3 billion year-long pause in game number 1. So for Pulse, it just is what it is. Like, 0-5, 2-10, I think it is indicative of where this team is at. They are clearly the worst team in the NACL. They're not going to be able to compete with anybody from this point onwards, and I think it's pretty obvious that this team is going to struggle to even win another game the rest of the split. And for Luminosity, they're awesome. They're really good. They're finding their groove. Tactical is in incredible form, and I think Fake God has also been great so far to start off 2025. They just have to be able to keep it up. They've already had some of their hardest challenges thrown at them, and they've done pretty well in those matchups. It should be pretty easy coasting for the rest of the regular season, and that should mean good things for them. Then moving on to our second series of the second day here, and again, obvious outcome. It's DarkZero taking on Supernova, and DarkZero is going to pick up the 2-0 win. They're going to move to 5-0 and 10-0 in terms of their game score, and once again, this team is just clicking on every cylinder. They go from absolutely decimating their first series of the week against a team that, is good in conviction. Like, they got to fight in that series. They certainly weren't run over in the same kind of way, but, they end up walking out of that without dropping a game, and they run it back here, and they decimate Supernova even harder. It's a 29-minute win in game 1 and a sub-24-minute win in game number 2. It's just ridiculous what this team is doing right now. Nobody is even close to being on their level in Tier 2, and I think unless something drastic happens, and we'll kind of talk about the drastic thing that could happen, this team is almost certainly going undefeated in this split. That being said, all 5 members are getting subbed out for next week, and so that definitely introduces an interesting paradigm. But for Supernova on the other side, this team's fine. Like, they are what they are. I just don't think they're great. Again, I've continuously kind of put them around number 7, number 8 in my power rankings. That's where I've put Winthrop. I am a lot lower on the collegiate teams that aren't Maryville at the current moment in terms of what they've been in the NACL in particular. Obviously, CLAW has its own little interesting meta kind of going on right now with the championships, but Supernova just didn't have the firepower to keep up here. There were some obvious, candidates for dud of the series that we will point out, but a couple of these players have not transitioned well from Tier 3 to Tier 2. We'll start with DarkZero, player of the series. Come on, man, it's Zamudo. He went 24, 2, and 14 across 2 games of Rumble and mostly on this Gangplank in game number 2. Absolutely ridiculous. This guy had like a 1.5k gold lead by himself, maybe like a 2k gold lead by himself in game number 2. Just ridiculous what he's doing right now. I talked a lot last week about how Pobelter was very sneakily like my front runner for most valuable prospect if he's allowed to get it. I don't know if he's allowed to get that for MVP of tier 2 if you want to call that out. If you want a real prospect that's kind of leading the charge right now for MVP, it's Zamudo in the top lane here for DarkZero, especially if this team is going to go undefeated. It's going to be a pretty easy choice for me to pick him because I do think he's been the most valuable player on the most valuable team in the league right now. He's just decimating everybody he's going into. I think on average he's got like a 1.5k gold lead at 15 minutes throughout every game that they've played. It's just ridiculous, the stats that this guy's been able to put up. And it's not like he's not playing with a lot of really great players. He's just the one that's standing out the most. And that breakout that we saw in 2024, that breakout is getting broken once again here in 2025, which is fun. Yuji continues to be exceptionally good, especially on facilitators. He's not going to get the credit that he got last year because the games aren't quite as flashy as they were last year, and Zamudo is taking more of the headlines, but Yuji still has been exceptionally good. Zyko was really good in this series. Pike in game 1, Milio in game 2. I really like both of these champions, specifically the Milio that I think is a bit underplayed at the current moment if you want to go for something like a Lucian or something more aggressive in lane to punish some of these more passive lanes that are kind of starting to pop up again. It's a really nice combo, and I think obviously if you feel like you're the better 2v2, you can get away with it pretty heavily. Spyrax was fine, maybe a bit over-eager, but still, again, fine. He's just really aggressive right now. He's awesome. Like, he was awesome in the first couple of weeks. This was the first week where I was like, maybe take a little bit of a step back. Maybe the heat check is a little bit too hot, but they're still winning. It's not like he's not doing well. Everything's just kind of working for DarkZero. It feels a bit unfair. And for Supernova, on the other side, it's hard to really judge them too much for getting obliterated by Dragonsteel, but this is kind of who they are. They're a team that's going to be fine and maybe survive against some of the bottom tier teams, but I don't think this is a playoff team in terms of the way that they're currently constructed. I think they just have too many flaws. You can point out the top side of the map for completely letting this team down, and I'm definitely going to do that. Whether you want to give Dead of the Series to Stray or to Keel, I think is up to you. I can't not give it to Stray in the top lane because he just got absolutely decimated by Zamudo, but it's not like Keel fared any better, and he was playing one of his signature champions in the Nunu that's kind of been considered, one of his pocket picks. The Nunu and the Karthus are kind of the champions I think of when I think of Keel as a player. And boy, did it not work out for him going up against Yuji in this one. Both of them just look completely outclassed. Stray has not been very good at this level. I wouldn't say he's been like a bottom tier top laner because it's just so hard for anybody to compete with where Pulse is at right now, but he's certainly not been good. And Keel has been super disappointing so far. I actually think he's been one of the worst junglers in tier 2 so far this year, which is just not what we expected going into this split. It's not like the rest of the team is playing great. I continue to get lower and lower on this bot lane as we progress through a lot of these series. I think Shogo is good as a player. He's got crazy good mechanics, but he sometimes can just get himself into bad positions, and I think this team doesn't draft around him particularly well. Rhino has not been good at the tier 2 level. I think he's the one that's looked a bit more, lost at this level. Asilo was fine in this series. I'm certainly not going to criticize him too heavily, but Supernova still has a lot to fix. This team is 1-4 for a reason. They're near the bottom of the standings. I don't think they're going to be fighting for their life, but AMI is way better than we thought they were going to be, and Supernova could be in danger if they don't turn things around quick. And for DarkZero, obviously danger is them. Like, they are the danger in the NACL at the current moment. There's nothing else to talk about. This team is basically perfect across the board when they want to be, and they continue to decimate in ways that we haven't seen, at least in recent memory in tier 2. But that's going to bring us to day number 3, our final day here in the NACL in week number 4, and it's a 2-2 matchup between CCG Esports and Winthrop University, where CCG is going to pick up the 2-0 win. They're going to move to 3-2 to 7-4 on the split, and they just continue to look excellent. Now, Winthrop obviously isn't the biggest piece of competition in the world, but they've performed fine up until this point. They were 5-5. They were the definition of a 500 team heading into this series, and CCG outplayed them in almost every aspect, especially in that game number 2. You can point in a lot of good places for them. For Winthrop, I think this more so confirms what we already thought was the case for this team, that their record is a little bit facetious, that they've had a pretty easy start, that they were able to get pretty lucky with a win over Blue Otter. That might keep them out of the bottom 2 conversation for the rest of the split, considering where Supernova is in general, but this is not a team that's competing for top 5. This is not a team that's in that vicinity. In my opinion, CCG is a clear tier above them, and I think they proved that here. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series series is very obviously going to go to Dardoch. This was a phenomenal Dardoch showing. Honestly, I think this is one of his best in many years. This is a guy who has been around forever. Obviously, plenty of people know Dardoch from his time on Team Liquid or his time on, TSM or Echo Fox, that super fun team with him and Huni and Phoenix and, those eras of Dardoch that people remember a little bit more fondly. But it's a guy who's been grinding in Tier 3 for a long time after that. It's not like he's taken this gigantic break from pro play. This is a guy who's continued to play at a pretty decent level and has finally gotten another shot here in Tier 2, and he's making the most of it in terms of how he's playing. He's a great facilitator. I think people kind of remember him as a carry player from his time in Tier 1, from his time in the LCS. That's not really who he's been at all over the past couple of years, though. And so I'm not really shocked to see him pull out something like the Xin Zhao and be so good at letting his laners take over. That's kind of what I would expect from his game plan in terms of how the rest of this team ends up working. And again, it is just working out really well. It's funny because I'm going to get this wrong, and someone in the comment section is going to yell at me, but there is a chance that Dardoch and Sword, my player of the series and dud of the series here, were both in the TSM system at the same time when Sword was on Academy and Dardoch was the jungler. I don't know. I can't confirm if that's actually true. I'm sure somebody in the comments will tell me, but it would be funny if that ended up being the case. But Dardoch was obviously excellent here. I want to give a big shout out to Breezy, who just continues to be unreal good for this team in terms of his setups. I think you can make an argument that he was the best player on the team this week. He just didn't get any player of the series. It was a really great look from him. I love him as a playmaker, and he's playing better now than he has in the last couple of years, in my opinion. Not to say that that's like he was bad or anything the past couple of years, but he's been kind of the definition of an above average support at this level. He's been better than above average, in my opinion, across this split. Again, still a lot to play for, but I've been very impressed with him. Aojun really stabilized here. He was the better mid laner between him and Sword. This is the spot that Aojun needs to land in. He doesn't need to be a star right now. He needs to let everybody else kind of step up. Like Dardoch, Array, Breezy, they are the veterans here. Even Crimson has more experience than him at this level. He needs to rely and lean on those players in the big matchups and not be a gigantic negative for the team. But if he can go up against someone like Sword and generate resources on his own, that's big. And then Crimson was awesome here. I debated Crimson for player of the series. I really do think he was that good. So CCG just clicking. This could be the fourth best team if you wanted to put them above Conviction because they went 2-0 this week and Conviction lost. I think that that's totally fair. I don't exactly know where I'm going to land on them just yet because I haven't done the power rankings, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility for me. And then for Winthrop on the other side, it just doesn't look great when they actually have to try and play from behind. And that's unfortunately what happened in especially game number 2. Sword is going to get dead of the series for me, but it should be one of the jungle mid duo. It should be either Wilson or Sword. Neither of them played particularly well here. Wilson was at the very least very active on the map, attempting to make plays pretty consistently on Lilia in game 1 and the Vi in game 2. Sword was just losing and inactive. Like, he was not moving around, he was not really making plays, and he wasn't ahead in gold. He wasn't really generating resources for himself. It just was kind of a bad series from Sword. Kind of unfortunate because I think Sword had been a little bit of an interesting mid laner in the first couple of weeks here when they were winning against some of the lower tier teams. Sword was looking really good in those games, and I was kind of hopeful that he was going to be able to piece together an average mid lane NACL split, like somewhere around what you would expect of a player like Darkwings or even like a Samikin, kind of be put into that conversation. But right now, this felt more like a crashing back down to earth because this was a matchup he should have done better in and didn't. Denethor got outplayed on the top side. I've never been the biggest Denethor fan, but, Crimson was better. I think that was very clear. Like I said, Wilson was pretty out-jungled even with the aggressiveness. Mobility and only 35 are the strength of this team, and when we talk about how they're going to win games, it's always going to be through them in the bot lane, but if the rest of this team is running it and they're not getting big leads, which they can't really against Array and Breezy because they're too solid in the 2v2, Winthrop is a bit doomed. This team kind of needs the bot lane to be able to win early, and that just didn't really happen here. CCG just are too stable on that side of the map. So Winthrop is more so who we thought they were, and CCG, luckily for me, is more so who I thought they were at the beginning of the split. I put them at number 5 in my power rankings in the primer. They have lived up to that and then some. They might even be better than that at the current moment, and it does feel like everybody on the team. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here, and it was a good one to close things out. It was Near Airport taking on Apex Mission Impossible, and Near Airport is, of course, going to pick up the 2-0, but you know what this means? Every single series this week was a 2-0 in favor of the winner. We didn't get a single game 3 across all of week number 4. Pretty funny how things end up working out like that. Just some dominant victories for some of the best teams in the league, and that's exactly what this was, a dominant victory by one of the best teams in the league. They continue to look incredibly good. Near Airport feel like like they're finally starting to find their own style. And quite frankly, this is the first time where it felt like they actually tapped into their best player in the way that they kind of should be tapping into. Maybe they just want to see if they can do it through others, but Spica is unreal. Why aren't you playing through him every single game? He's probably the best player at this level in terms of his individual mechanics. Let him be the main character of Near Airport. Let him get all the resources and let him win you games. I know Pobelter has been great, and Biofrost and Double Lift and even TF Blade have really impressed me, but Spica's the guy on Near Airport. Let him be the guy. And then for AMI on the other side, this is more of what you would expect from AMI. The 2-2 has been awesome to watch. I've been super pleasantly surprised by their outcomes up until this point, because I think all of their wins have really come at an unexpected time, except for obviously the Polestar one. But, you know, this is not a team that you can look at and say they have nothing going for them. There is a lot going for AMI that could keep them out of the bottom two. It just didn't necessarily manifest itself in this particular series. So we'll talk about it here. Spica's obviously player of the series. Do I really have to go into this? Did you watch the Naafiri game in game number 2? First of all, why are you giving Spica Naafiri? Like, where is the draft strategy there? I get Poppy's a really good counter to Naafiri. Xin Zhao has been considered a big answer. Vi has been considered a big answer over in the LPL, but Poppy has really been the one that I've kind of said is the most consistent. But let me remind you, it's Spica on Naafiri in the way that that champion exists right now. It's just not fair. It's unreal that you could feel comfortable giving this over because you have the counter pick planned. It obviously didn't end up working out, and Spica took over the entire game. He got every resource possible that you could possibly get here. Pobelter, once again, kind of playing as more classic champions like Victor and Lissandra to be able to move around the map and be able to kind of shut down a lot of the aggressive plays that AMI want to make. And then you've got TF Blade kind of 1v1ing on the top side on things like Gragas and Yone, Double Lift on some sort of carry for the back half of the game. Like, it makes a lot of sense. They are starting to find their style, but if that style is not centered around Spica carrying games, I think you are mismanaging your resources, and I still think everybody else on this team is really good. That's just how good Spica is. Now, the one player that I also want to give a shout out to that I maybe haven't talked about enough this split is Biofrost in the support position. He was exceptionally good in the open qualifiers. I think you could make an argument that him and Spica were the two best players for the team, although Pobelter once again was very good in the OQs, but he's continued that success rate moving over here to tier 2. It's just nice to see Bio look good because he did not look good at all when he last played in tier 1. And I think there were some solo queue concerns with where his account was sitting and, you know, just generally the vibe of how he was playing in high-end solo queue, that maybe he wasn't going to be ready to play in tier 2. Maybe he was more of a name. That has not been the case at all. He's been one of the best supports in the NACL without exception. It's not even close. It's awesome to watch. Double Lift was great. Pobelter continues to play his role. TF Blade can get a little bit, you know, over-eager on the top side, we'll just say, but it still ends up working out for NA in the end. It's just a good look. Like, them being able to beat AMI so convincingly, they're getting better and better game over game, and that's the scary thing. And then for Apex Mission Impossible, it's still nice to see where they're sitting, but this was not a great series on tape. This is not really one that you can look back on and feel great about. Low Jazz just got annihilated in the back half of this series. I get that the game plan in game 2 was for Poppy to give every resource possible to the laners, to Mini, to Baz, to try and get them into a spot where they could, you know, carry the game in the mid to late game, where they could kind of neutralize what the Naafiri was doing, but the problem with that is if you're sacrificing every resource you have as Poppy in this game, well, don't forget, you drafted Poppy because she's the answer to Naafiri, and if Poppy can no longer answer Naafiri, then no one can answer Naafiri. It's all well and good for Mini and Baz to have a lot of gold in game number 2. If the Naafiri just completely eliminates them from the equation, it's really difficult to play out this game, and that just kind of ended up being the case for Low Jazz, but he's been okay, I would say, so far in tier 2. I've been decently impressed. You know, I think the rest of this team was fine here. I'm not saying that they were good. I think Decoy obviously was fine on the top side. The Scion game, certainly I'm not like pointing to him. Baz, I think, actually did well with the resources he was given. Pocus is a little bit aggressive, I would say, for where this team is at. I understand why he's a little bit more comfortable playing super far forward because he's been successful on that in tier 3. I just don't think it's as rewardable here in tier 2 with the way that his team is set up, but Baz has been fine. I actually been impressed by him in terms of what he's been at the tier 2 level. Mini has been fine. I liked Mini coming in to this split. AMI is who they are. This is still a team that I'm projecting to eventually be bottom 2, but they've set themselves up into a position where that's not guaranteed by any means. It's just Near Airport is so out of their comfort zone, like out of their, you know, landing strip, if you will. I tried to make some sort of plane joke there, but Near Airport's kind of just out of the realm of possibility for them to be able to compete with. It's not shocking to see them drop here, but that's because Near Airport is really good. The top 3 are all incredible. I think they're all tier 1 level teams, and I think they continue to prove that. If Near Airport gets better game over game, like they kind of have been recently, who's to say this team still can't be a contender regardless of what's happened early on in the split? Alright, but that is going to do it for my NACL week number 4 overview and analysis video here in the spring split. Up on the screen, the updated standings after 4 weeks of action. I would typically say here you can see the power rankings changes, but again, there's just not a lot to change for me. In fact, there's nothing to change this week. I would normally say any ties are broken alphabetically, but no ties as well. Everything you're seeing here is very similar to what you saw last week. I just don't feel comfortable making any changes at the current moment. DarkZero, Dragonsteel are definitely the best team in the NACL. I don't even think that's debatable at the current moment. Luminosity still is the only team to beat near airport, and of course Luminosity's only loss is to DarkZero, and so they end up being in that order in terms of my power rankings. Luminosity at 2, near airport at 3, as you can see in the column to the right. And I also didn't want to change Conviction and CCG at the current moment. I get that CCG had a 2-0 week and they looked excellent here, and Conviction did drop their series to DarkZero, but it's DarkZero. You're certainly not trying to overreact to that performance, and Conviction still has looked very good outside of that, although I think it's very realistic for CCG to be number 4, and I think these are basically both 4.5. Whoever you want at 4, whoever you want at 5, I think is fair, but they should both be in those 2 spots. And then everybody else, again, pretty determined for me. Blue Otter is still very clearly at number 6. I expect this team to figure it out and to turn it around. I don't think they will be bottom 3. I think their schedule has been pretty hard, I would say, to start up here. Their loss to Winthrop is certainly not ideal, but outside of that, I imagine they turn it around. And then Winthrop's going to stay at 8, even with, Supernova continuing to really struggle. I don't think either of these teams have impressed me so much. Winthrop has a better record, and so if you wanted to put them above Supernova because of that, I think that that's fair, but for now, I still value Supernova more, and then AMI and Pulse are still in my bottom 2. AMI certainly has shown some flashes, but again, I don't think it gets easier here for them, and Pulse is easily the worst team in the NACL, so those are my power rankings. Let me know if you think I should have changed anything, if CCG should have moved up to number 4, if you think that a team like Blue Otter could have fallen, or that Supernova could have fallen, or that AMI should be higher than 9. Always interested to hear what you guys think down in the comment section below, but let's go ahead and move on to my player of the week. And my dud of the week for week number 4, player of the week was super easy for me. It's going to go to Zamudo, the top laner for DarkZero. He's just been unreal so far in 2025. Easily the best start he's ever had to a year, to a split, whatever you want to call it. He is just decimating competition at the current moment. Maryville has always been the favorites for me going into this split, but even I didn't project Zamudo to be this strong. It's actually been unfair to watch him play. His teammate, Sajed, is going to be an honorable mention, a runner-up this week, because he was fantastic in all of the games that they ended up playing. Super consistent piece for the team, even if he doesn't have the same kind of highs as Scary Jerry did last year. He's filled in nicely for them. And then the other honorable mention is going to be Dardoch, the jungler for CCG. They had a phenomenal week, and whether you wanted to give this to Dardoch or Array, I think it's kind of up to you. Breezy was in consideration for an honorable mention spot for me, but it should be somebody on CCG, and I think Dardoch was the biggest facilitator for what they were doing this week. So Zamudo's player of the week, but Dardoch and Sajed are my runner-ups. And then my dud of the week, unfortunately, is once again going to go to Adam in the mid lane here for Pulse. This is the second time this split already he's gotten dud of the week, and it's just unfortunate. Every time Pulse loses, somebody kind of loses really hard, and it becomes really easy to kind of point your fingers and say, oh, this guy was like 0-12. Like, that's obviously, a little bit of an easy thing to identify, but at the same time, like, everything is wrong with Pulse. It's not just Adam in the mid lane. This is a Pulse Star is dud of the week here for week number 4, in the same way that they were in week number 2. It just kind of is the way that it is. So at least officially, Adam is dud of the week for week 4, and Zamudo is player of the week. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we'll be covering the rest of the NACL, and we do also cover all 4 of the major regions, so LTA North, LEC, LCK, and LPL every single week on this channel. If you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all